Today's guest is Byron Belitsos. He is a leading expert of the Urantia Book with training in philosophy, history, and theology. He is the author of the book Your Evolving Soul, the Cosmic Spirituality of the Urantia Revelations, as well as he is the publisher, editor, and co-author of numerous acclaimed and award-winning books, including many related to the Urantia Revelation. He has been a student of the Urantia Book for 4 decades, and he has spoken about its teaching at many conferences on innumerable radio and television programs. Byron, thank you so much for giving me a little bit of your time this evening. I really appreciate you.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. It's an honor to be on your show. Appreciate it a lot.
All right. I know a little bit about the Urantia Book, and I'm guessing a lot of my audience may not know a little bit or only know a little bit either or as well. So can we start with just the basics, like the Urantia for Dummies?
Well, okay, let's go. It's not really so much about a book as about the relationship with spirit, with the divine, as it's unfolding over the centuries. And we've received teachings, revelations in the past, but nothing in book form in this way. There's been certainly oracular revelations, channelings, and even in the Bible, there's channeling. The prophets were really like channels, and Moses was in a way a great channel. And these things got written down in inspired writings. Certainly we have that in Hinduism and even Buddhism. Now there was a need for an update particularly on Christianity. And it makes sense when you think about it, that Christianity has, this ancient text. It's beautiful, awesome text, but it's, getting a little bit out of date there. So,
right.
Really, think about it. If the divine is parental, like a parent to you, at a certain point, your parent's going to take care of your needs.
Yeah.
And we need something like this in the troubled times that we're in. So they being the celestials, as we call them, or the revelators, or the authors of this, purportedly the celestial beings wrote this text. So, it's kind of a big claim. So you need some big evidence for this big claim that it was written by, non-human beings. And the evidence, part of the evidence is that there's been copyright lawsuits over this book, and the original publisher lost all the lawsuits because they could never produce any evidence of an author. None, zero, nothing.
Interesting.
And to come up with a book, it's 2,100 pages, coherent from beginning to end, and there's no author, no editor, no nothing. And they copyrighted it anyway because it made sense to protect it in the beginning, but they couldn't. No challenge. They couldn't stand up to any challenge because basically the court said, if you can't produce an author, then there is no copyright. So that's the big evidence that there's no author, because nobody would write this thing and not have any human connection to get, to make a little bit of money or something, because, it costs thousands of dollars to typeset and print this thing. I mean, hundreds of thousands when you think about it, because they've sold 600,000 or 700,000 copies. And there's, nobody's collecting any royalties or anything like that. It's just all donations. So, this is all very charitable gift to mankind without an author. So we think it is celestial. And, I was a book editor and a book publisher for 22 years, and I'm basically retired. And it's hard for somebody to write 20 pages, let alone 200 pages, let alone 2,000 pages, and not take credit. I mean, who does that?
Yeah.
So, we think it is revelatory, and even if it's somebody wrote it, it's, I've been in philosophy and theology graduate school for much of my life, seems like, and I've just never seen anything that compares to it in terms of, philosophy of religion, what Christianity is, who God is, what the soul is, and even stuff about NDE, although we got different terminology for that.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly it is a primary text if you want to know about soul evolution. And so I wrote a book about that aspect of it, and it's the first book on that. And but the soul aspect of the Urantia book is really a lot of great interest to anybody interested in the paranormal.
Would you say that even just the information or the data from the book itself is too complex or too deep for just one person to write?
This was written in the 30s before computers, so it would have taken a massive, just the editorial challenge to put together science, philosophy, religion, history, and to concoct it, to make it up. Mm-hmm. And then foist it. You would have needed, a dozen professional editors to pull it together. I don't think it's possible. Because I've edited over 50 books. I mean, there's no way you can do, it's just, I wouldn't be, who would do this? Mm-hmm. For what? Because it's all benign and it's all, extremely beautiful and inspiring. So there's a worldwide movement, it's in 15 languages, and Christians all over the world, people just go into ecstatic states when they read this thing, because it's an update, particularly if you have an interest in Christ. Mm-hmm. You got in the Old Testament these wonderful stories, they're just fabulous. I love the New Testament, not Old Testament, New Testament. And in the New Testament, this story is like a skeleton of the story. And now imagine filling all that in and giving you 700-page biography of Jesus, 20 pages, right? Mm-hmm. And every little event, you name it, the wedding at Cana where he turned water into wine, that's like this much in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And the Urantia book's the whole chapter.
Wow.
So imagine that being fleshed out.
Yeah.
What would that be like? If you're a Christian, it would, so, Christians say to me, like, well, how could you ever, claim to have something that supersedes the New Testament? How audacious of you, it's not me, number one. Number two, it is totally friendly to the Bible. It's Bible friendly. It actually has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of references to passages in the Bible. It's like you take a passage from the Bible and it builds out from that. Mm-hmm. So it's totally biblical. I wouldn't say Bible centric, but I would say Bible friendly. Mm-hmm. It has all the main doctrines of Christianity, except with a few exceptions. So, for example, the Trinity, the Incarnation, the divinity of Christ, the main teachings in the Creed, Nicene Creed, are in the Urantia book, but expanded, but without the virgin birth.
Mm-hmm. Does the book cover any other religions, or does it basically stick to Christianity? And if so, why do you think it only stuck with Christianity?
What it does is it states that Christianity is the supreme revelation to our planet, and the name of the planet is Urantia. Mm. So the celestials look down on us, and that's the name they use, right? Mm-hmm. So the supreme revelation to any planet is to have an incarnation of the Creator. That's big, right. And it's not any simple matter. So, for example, to have a guru who rises up and teaches is nothing compared to the incarnation of a divine being. Mm-hmm. So it happens once in the history of the planet. Now there are avatars, but that's something else. This is a divine incarnation of the second person of the Trinity, assuming you believe in that stuff, right? The Trinity.
Right.
And so that's from the eternal realms. A being comes forth and incarnates into the time-space realm in a body. Mm. That's a massive revelation, because, the Hebrews had this, fantastic revelation from Moses and from the prophets, but they never saw the deity as a human being. I mean, so, they were without, then they had a lot of doubts, and they really, really, really struggled. I mean, most of the Old Testament is a big fight, kind of like, with God, like, why don't you show yourself? Why don't you really show up? And this is like the central experience of Job, the book of Job. He's like, I'm suffering here. We're suffering. It's all this evil. Why don't you show your face? You're so hidden. Why is that? And well, at the end of the book of Job, Job gets this revelation, and God comes out of the whirlwind and kind of shows himself. Actually doesn't show himself, has a voice that appears. It's a beautiful, incredible, teaching that Job receives. But it still leaves you like, well, who is this really? And so out of love, compassion, the divine comes into us as a human being. And, it sounds like this old-fashioned Christian claim that, we don't really believe that anymore. It's just magic. It's just old, ancient, old-fashioned. But actually, the Urantia book makes it very plausible and tells you that, the Urantia book has a lot about life on other planets. And it says on every planet, you have one great incarnation. Because that's the gift that everyone deserves. They deserve to meet deity as a human, in human form. It's impossible, really. It was like, people just broke their brains trying to figure out how that could happen. And so what we call patristic Christianity, the early Christianity, is how they figured it out. And they took them 500 years basically to say it's possible for God to come into a human body and the two be one person, but it's two wills, two wills. And the Urantia book tells you in detail how that could be done, how deity can be present in a person. And there's the human will and the will of God in that person. It's totally miraculous. But that's why Jesus was able to do the miracles. It's a person who can switch on the God part of himself and do unbelievable miracles. And the miracles of the Bible are affirmed in the Urantia book, almost all of them. I think all of them are affirmed. But you get much more detail. For example, the great story of the feeding of the 5,000, if with fish, right? The story where
kind of.
A lot of people, don't know their Bible that well, and I didn't either, until I got this stuff from the Urantia book. But Jesus had people following him around because everybody could see this was a great prophet, and he was healing people left and right. People were blind. He would give them sight. People were, lame. I mean, everybody saw this. So this crowd was following him. And then suddenly, after hours of teaching, there was no food. Well, they couldn't send a car somewhere to get some carry-out food. So, they had some fish, and he took the fish and multiplied it and fed 5,000 people. And there, 5,000 witnesses to this. So this story is a very strong story in the Bible. It's like, who would make up a story like that?
Right.
So the Urantia book has a whole chapter on this story, which is this long in the Bible, but. And so, it's just an unbelievably awesome, thing. So to get that explained is a gift. That's why I spend a lot of my life and leisure time trying to get this across. But Christians are so dogmatic that they have a hard time with it, and I understand that.
Right. Two questions. One thing is I've always struggled with, and I think you're kind of explaining it, and it seems a little bit more helpful the way you're explaining it. But one of the things I always struggled with is how could Jesus be God? And I think he even quotes him as if speaking about God as his father. So how can he be the same guy? And I never really got that. And two, I wonder if you can touch on that as well. I think that it's known from people who have been in seminary that the actual date of the crucifixion is kind of not accurate. Like one book says it was before, there's a festival, and then one of them's after. So it's some conflicting data. And does that clear that up?
Yeah, it clears that up. It needed to be cleared up because it's the greatest event in the planet's history. It ought to be cleared up at some point, right? So, but he chose to come at that time because of the fact that there was the opportunity, because the Roman Empire was so huge, you could get a message out, which they did very well. And they knew they would move across the Silk Road to China, which they did in the 6th century. So it was a way to get this thing out so that you could do a couple of big things, not just the teachings and the appearance of Jesus, but also the sending of his spirit. We call that Pentecost. This kind of, it's like a cartoon in the Bible, but the Urantia Book says there's this real event after his resurrection, after he goes on high. He says, when I get up there, I'm going to send my spirit to you so you don't feel lonely, because I've been with you and you're going to miss me. So I'm sending my real spirit, the Holy Spirit, and that will come into you to show you the truth. And he sent another spirit that's not clearly stated in the Bible. It's a big deal and a big revelation. In the Urantia Book, he sent a spirit into the heart of everybody that's resident there, whereas the Holy Spirit is like around you, and you're like in this field of love, really. But there's something inside. It's literally like in the nervous system, in the heart, in the brain, really, is a fragment, really, of God's self. So this is a teaching that you get in Quakers, and most of the Christians really miss this, or they messed it up. That there's like a light of God inside you, distinct from the Holy Spirit. So now back to your earlier question: how could Jesus be God? Right. Well, nobody could figure that out, and they said, "Well, how could he be God?" Well, God has to keep the universe going. How could he be down here? And so they figured that out. That because Jesus said so, but it wasn't totally clear. That God has three faces. Not just one, like the Muslims think of God as one without division. But and Hinduism has God with various faces. The statues, you see that, right? It's different facets. But Christianity has three faces, but they're one, but they're three, right? So the one original deity, eternal deity, is what we call the Father. It's really Mother, Father. So that's eternal deity at the center of the universe, who has a complemental self, which is really God's self, turning around and looking at himself and saying, "Oh, I'm God." It's sort of like you being able to recognize, "Oh, I'm me," right? So God has self-awareness, and being deity, being God has self-awareness in perfection, whereas my self-awareness is imperfect. But by definition, God has perfect sense of self. So the sense of self that God has personifies. So it personifies as the so-called son. So it steps out, God steps out of himself as a son, looking at himself, and then the relationship of the two becomes a third face. So this father and son, really the parent and the sibling, divine parent, divine sibling, then has a third face, which is the representation of the two. So the two have this conjoint being, which represents them. And so that's the third person of the Trinity, but Christ is an incarnation of the second person. So the Father cannot incarnate because he's at the center of the universe. He's got to keep things going, right? So the Son has mobility in a sense. So the Son is able to incarnate. But the Urantia Book shows that that the Son is actually more to the Son than what we get in the Bible. But it's basically the right principle that deity can fold in and fold out, right? It folds in as one, folds out as revelation. So when it's folded in as one, that's what the Muslims got, clearly. They got that, the unity. But it's also diversity. So when it wants to fold out and show itself, it comes as three, and then the three has permutations. So the 3 permutation of 3 goes to 7. That's why 7 is sacred. So we can get into that later maybe, but it's the same revelation in the Tao Te Ching, right? The 1 becomes 3 and then becomes many. That's the first line of the Tao Te Ching, right? So it's a principle that's been known on the planet, and that one has many and one, and that's how God the Father, Creator Father, can have a representation who is fully God, because God can do different things, has different functions. So I don't want to get too theological, but I just finished a seminary degree myself. I didn't put that in the bio, but I just completed it.
Right. I was remembering now as you were speaking, the one that the inconsistency was, well, did he die before Passover or after Passover? That's what I don't know why I couldn't remember that. But anyways, let me ask you this, and you might be able to answer this. And I think people kind of use these terms synonymously, but what is the difference between a spirit and a soul?
Yeah, great. Awesome. Excellent. Glad you. That's the main topic of my last book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's actually because what happened is in ancient times, there was a distinction between spirit and soul. And it was in Greek philosophy, but it was not really clear. And the Hebrews had their own distinctions. So the Greeks are over here in Athens, the Hebrews are over here in Jerusalem. And then Christ comes in the middle of that. And they couldn't translate it that well. So what happened is they conflated the 2 words. And the Greek words are psyche and pneuma. Like pneuma is the word we use for pneumonia, right? That's the root word, which means breath. So the spirit, or pneuma, is distinct from the psyche, or the mind, the soul. So that was in there, but they lost it and they messed it up. So they didn't clearly get it that there is a spirit in you, as I said, that was conferred upon everybody by Christ. 2 spirits: the Holy Spirit, which surrounds you as a field, and then the spirit inside of you. So the spirit inside of you is not the soul. And everybody gets that because we don't have good definitions. And I spent like 10 years on this research. There's a lot of definitions that are not all over the map. But the Urantia book, in my view, clears up the definition that the soul is the evolving part of the spiritual self, but the core of the spiritual self is eternal. So it can't evolve. And that's a pretty wild thing to think about, that there's an eternal part of God in me that doesn't evolve. But what it does is it works with your mind. So the mind is just the mind. It's like animals have minds, right? But we have this more advanced mind. We have this spirit inside of the mind heart, which is stimulating us to have higher values and higher ideals. So the inspirations you get often come from that higher self. What in the New Age we call it the higher self, right? Or if you're in 12-step, you call it the higher power. Same thing, right? But this is a pure concept, and that doesn't evolve. The higher self is the higher self. So it's catalyzing. Its work is to catalyze the growth of some third thing. It's not the mind, and it's not the spirit. It's in between. So it partakes of the mind and the spirit. So imagine that there's this substantial thing called the mind. The mind is really quite advanced, but it's not the spirit. The mind can have awareness and consciousness. That's a major deal. But the spirit up here has basically infinite consciousness. It too has consciousness. So every time that the mind, and the mind has to do it, right? Every time the mind makes a decision that's of higher value, a record is made of it. So it's sort of like that there's some mechanism that hits the save button. Whenever you make a choice that has value in the universe, Like I decide to help a friend who's sick. I decide to, get married because I'm in love. Big decisions, but even small decisions, but they have to have significance in the decision, not just like whether to have scrambled eggs in the morning, but a value choice. So every time that happens, the universe gets into action and saves that. So the Hindus might, you might have heard of the Akashic record, right? So, so there's a record like that, but it's a perfect record. And as you know, Jeff, from NDEs and from Life Review, the Life Review is a perfect record, right? I mean, most of them, not all of them, but most of them state that it's like a perfect record that plays back in the Life Review. So the point of departure for my research is, how is that like the NDE stories that we're hearing? The Urantia Book is telling us that a perfect record is being made. And at death, it doesn't say this right out, but we now know that right after death, it plays back. So you can know yourself for the ascent in heaven. And so self-knowledge. But in the meantime, as you're maturing in your life, you get little playbacks of your life, right? Little memories. And, I'm in my 60s, and I now have moments of like, wow, man, I remember when I was 6 years old and this happened, and it just comes to you. And it's like this, it's like the life review of an NDE can happen without having an NDE. And we know that from all sorts of cases where, people get scared by something like a lightning bolt, literally. And they're like, see their life go before their eyes, right?
Yeah.
And that's life review, kind of a mini version. And I had one. I had a near drowning event once, and I had a life review before the lifeguard pulled me out. I had a life review, and so I had a mini life review. I didn't die, but I'm beginning to have more life review moments because it's in the soul. So it's not the material mind, the memory of the mind, of the brain. It's the memory that is it's non-physical memory, but it's soul memory. But that's your soul. It's in here. So that's what we think from the Urantia Book. So the Urantia Book explains in great detail how the memory gets laid down. It's like a hard drive. But what's laying it down onto the hard drive of the soul is the spirit self. So the spirit self is uniquely competent to make these hit the save button. And so you're not doing it. It's unconscious, obviously. So it goes, oh, I'm going to save that. This guy's on a roll. I'm going to save this whole thing, right? So that goes into the hard drive of the soul. So, what we're trying to do, according to the Urantia teaching, and common sense, I would say, is grow quantity of soul, get it bigger. But there's another dimension. There's also a qualitative dimension. Is you have, like, let's say there's a horizontal dimension, which is the quantity of the soul, all the good things you've done, all added up. And then you have another dimension, which is the vertical, which is the quality of your soul. So it's the quality of your decisions rather than the quantity. So high quality decision might be become a violinist and learn how to play classical violin. That's quality choices, music and depth of art, right? So that makes the soul more resonant and high quality. But you can have a person who's a really good politician, who really gets the job done and is always going around to his constituents and doing good things and just doing a high quantity of good things. Or a CEO who really does a great job of building a company. We don't think of that as high quality. We think of that as quantity. Is building a profitable company and putting out a great product. So that's somebody that's growing this way, but maybe they're not growing this way as much. But if you had a monk, sitting in a monastery, they're going to get a high quality soul, but not much quantity.
Right.
Because they're not out serving and doing things. So this quantitative growth is fine, but the ideal would be to have both.
Mm-hmm.
So my book actually talks about how to grow high quality and high quantity soul, and the best example of that is Christ.
Mm-hmm.
No surprise.
When someone has a near-death experience and they say that they're out of their body, it's very common. I hear that they arrive at a beautiful garden, seeing colors that they normally can't see, and the garden is like the gateway, and that they have to go beyond it if they're not coming back. But when a person is experiencing that, would you say that their spirit and their soul has left their body? The mind is still in the body, and they're now experiencing that with just spirit and soul, and they're still experiencing consciousness with that. I'm saying that you don't need the body and the mind to still experience consciousness. I think you said that before.
Right. Let's say that the mind is a kind of substance that is identifiable and distinct. And what we're saying is we're getting like a higher mind kind of above it. And then up here's this spirit, which has its own mind, right? So this higher, what we call the mid-mind, right? So the sort of the basic mind, then the mid-mind, then the divine mind, really. So this mid-mind is what we think, what I think, is what is ascending in the NDE. And, but, it needs a lot more research based on the Urantia distinctions to know. But, I cover it for about 75 pages in the book. But the mid-mind has self with it. So the selfhood, distinct personhood, is different than the soul. So let me get into that if you don't mind, just a little bit. So this is a distinct substance as well. So the Urantia book gives you these very clear definitions that we really need. I mean, just for day to day, we don't need it. But if you're really going to work this out, you need good definitions. So this states that the self is distinct from all these other things. You get the spirit, you get the mind, you get the body, and you get the soul in the middle here, which is growing. But there's through it is kind of like the backbone, and that's the will and the personhood. Now, the personhood is a new revelation of the Urantia book. What we mean by person is something distinct from all these other things. So the person, we call it personality, but now psychology has a different definition. Personality in psychology is your behavior. It is not your behavior. This is the person, what you might call the existential self, that it's an unchanging like pattern that is you, but in the center of it is a will and the ability to be self-aware. So the self-awareness function is not a function of the mind. The mind has awareness, but not self-awareness. So self-awareness is actually a divine attribute that is brought into the infant, into the embryo, really. And given to the self having the ability to make conscious decisions is not something an animal does, with a few exceptions, really, higher primates and maybe elephants, but it's not really, still not the same. To be able to make value distinctions and discriminating among values and then choose them, that's something that only a person can do. Person who has personhood. And so that is a divine gift that is in this assembly of these factors, right? So in the NDE, the personhood with its soul leaves behind the body of the brain. So it's not just the soul, it's the person and the soul. And the person is a truly metaphysical entity. And personhood is unique and basically eternal also. But that's distinct from the spirit, which is like this energy of brilliant infinite consciousness, is distinct from the person. Because a person could exist without paying any attention to the God self. Right? So a really evil person would have no relationship to the higher self, right? but it is existing and is operating in the mind. And the soul is making a little, like Hitler was nice to his dog, they say. So it would make a little record of that. That would go into Hitler's soul. And he had a wife that he loved. I mean, no, I guess not a mistress, right? So he loved his mistress, and he loved a few of his friends, but he basically killed off all his friends. But so he had a little bit of soul, made his tiny little thing, but he had a real self, real person, and a real will. And so I don't know if that answers some of that, but
yeah, I think it helps clear it up some. So what does the Urantia book say about after death? Like, a lot of people believe that you can, make a decision and come back, and maybe you can have something to do this lifetime. Does it say like you make choices to come back, or do you go on and evolve to another dimension?
Right. It says that you go on to another dimension. And, I'm remiss because I didn't even mention that, but it really has a massive revelation of these higher worlds. So, we don't, I think of reincarnation as being something to it, but it really is from a pre-modern view of the universe. It's pre-scientific cosmology. It's really just a universe in which there's the Earth and some stars up there. So within that cosmology, they thought, well, you're just coming back, right? Because there's nowhere up, something beyond the stars, which is probably God. But they didn't have the revelation that we got later, really in Christianity. And in later Hinduism and Buddhism, definitely said, well, there are these higher worlds, but not much detail. But the Urantia book has massive detail about these higher worlds. So it's like you can't believe it has like the life of Christ, plus it's got this whole thing about the afterlife. So I've gone to these NDE conferences and I've given a couple of talks at them, and people are like, whoa, man, we don't know any of this stuff. Where did you, I said, ain't me, man. I got it from this revelatory text. So, I'd have a booth there and they'd be all looking at it. And, but it takes about a year to get through it. But I mean, basically, all the Urantia people, have this revelation that says when you die, you go to a series of 7 worlds. This is the first set of higher worlds. And on the first world, like if you're really a dark and evil person, they hold you there. Okay. And they you have to go to Sunday school. And you have to learn moral, teachings. And second world is sort of like living in Chicago or something. It's not very advanced. But third world is where people are really getting spiritual. For the first time in their existence, they're really, but fourth world are people who are like status of spiritually advanced. So 5th, 6th, and 7th worlds, by the time you get to the 7th world, you have fused with the spirit self. And once you do that, you definitely can't go back down. So you keep going up and you will have an eternal life. And these higher worlds are not like, floating on clouds. They're real worlds, and they go on forever and infinitely, really. And so the eternal life is not just sort of floating around like the Jetsons or something. You actually live on spheres, but the spheres are in higher dimensions. But it's not like a vague, cloudy kind of heaven. The spheres are actually material spheres. So in the higher worlds, they don't have, the 100, how many elements we have in the atomic chart? 100 something. Yeah. They have double that. So their atomic chart is like 200 plus. Ours is like 100 plus. So they have the 100 lower elements and another 100 elements. So these are physical worlds, but they're invisible to us, but in a higher dimension. So the universe is just these higher dimensions all the way up. So the afterlife is ascending to these different worlds. And coming into these worlds, it's people from other planets, right? Because the old cosmology had one planet, our planet. But the Urantia book says that there's 7 trillion inhabited planets.
Wow.
So it's like Star Trek.
Yeah.
And we have very good evidence that the Roddenberry, the writer, producer of Star Trek, was a Urantia student.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know
Because
that.
what you see there is like the Urantia book on display. But not the higher worlds, just other planets, physical worlds, right? So he doesn't depict higher worlds, but physical worlds all over the universe, right? So the Urantia book says are physical worlds. And the humanoids look different on these different worlds.
When people, incarnate or are born on this world, are they like brand new souls, or are they coming from somewhere else?
I knew you'd ask that one. So, that's a great question, Jeff. Really, thanks. You bring out the good stuff. I really appreciate it. Thank you. So the reason I was a little bit elaborate about these parts is because I knew you would ask this question. Yeah. So the spiritual self up here comes into us as a gift from God to the embryo, really. I'm sorry, not to the embryo. The personhood, the person. Because if you had a kid, each kid is very distinct personality, right? So they're definitely different. There's a pattern that's different. That comes into the embryo, and so that the baby has a will and awareness, but not much self-awareness. So when they ascend, or if they grow to the point, that they can make decisions on their own, about age 5, they receive this spirit, higher self, higher power into themselves, and it begins to stimulate them to make higher choices. And just about that time, the kid's going into first grade, and they're beginning to, you can't believe how kids can figure stuff out at age 5, and it's partially that. So the reason I tell you this is that before birth, God is like dispensing, distributing these higher selves to people. Some are virgin, but some are not. So what we think are past lives are that you don't have a virgin God self. It's not virgin. It's been in other people. So it has memory.
Oh, wow.
And it has memory of other people, but it's not their soul. So this is a hard one to get, and because it's complicated. So the soul is your possession in eternity. That's you, your property, your sovereign domain. But if you decide you don't want to ascend into the higher worlds, and you don't have to, then your soul goes back to God as a precious, sort of treasury to the divine treasury, you might say. But you're gone. But the record, there's actually 3 records. There's the Akashic record of everything. There's the record in your soul, and there's a record of your life in the thought, in this thing we call the thought adjuster. There's this technical word called thought adjuster. This God self adjusts your thoughts. So this thought adjuster, or this God self, has memory of the last life. So that's a person who decided not to survive after their death. This is up to you. And so you think it's your own past life. But the Urantia book says it is not your own past life. It's somebody else's past life. And you can have many of those. So if you do have an advanced God self or thought adjuster, you're going to be like a spiritual genius, because your God self had experience indwelling a person. So you think of somebody like Martin Luther King. He may have had few previous existences, but not him personally.
Right.
So the God self did. So the God self comes in with a lot of skill. So these kind of people show up very precocious. and he did, and but the people who believe in reincarnation constantly have this debate with Urantia people about this. So I think there is a solution, which is that some people really do reincarnate. And that's the anomaly. For the Urantia people, that's anomalous. And so there's a rising theory among Urantia people that reincarnation was an evil, sorry, not evil, but it was a redirection of the spiritual growth of the planet that was caused by a certain fallen entities. And it's very controversial. That so I didn't cover the fact that planet Earth is unusual. On most planets do not have a Holocaust, a Hiroshima. They don't have crazy wars. They don't have famines. They don't have pandemic. They don't have this stuff because they're normal planets. Most planets are normal. If you think the universe is like this, it ain't like this. The universe doesn't have planets on the verge of blowing themselves up. That's unsustainable. So there's, to imagine there are billions of planets like this, you might as well give it up. So the Urantia book is so lengthy and complicated because they're explaining why things are so messed up. First of all, when Jesus came here, they killed him, which has hardly ever happened in the universe. Then incarnate divine was killed by his own host people. It's one of the great crimes of the universe, really. So why would there be such criminality on our planet, right? So that's because of the default of the Lucifer rebellion. So not to get too complicated, but it's an important part of this message, which is that the celestial host of our planet, these are angels that are everywhere, right? So the Bible tells us there are seraphim and there are other kinds of angels that minister and love us. So it's possible, like 1 in a million, that the angels just give up and go to the dark side. So this was fomented from off-planet higher angels. So it's possible for higher angels to go astray, and those that are their subordinates follow them. And it's kind of a little bit hierarchical. With angels, it's a little bit more hierarchical. So the chief angel of our planet went to the dark side. So it kind of became like Darth Vader. So all the subordinates, but not all of them, most of them, became dark. And, it's pretty scary. But if you really read your Bible, you see that people were possessed by rebellious spirits. And Jesus is releasing them, right? He's healing these people and their demonic possession, the demons, come screeching out of the person. And they go, stop it. We know who you are. They know who Christ is. They've rebelled against him. Why are you doing this to us? They're screeching. It's like a horror movie. But he releases them and then they heal, right? And so that is what happened to our planet. So getting back to reincarnation. So it's believed by some, and I'm beginning to think it could be possible, that reincarnation was a shortcutting of the ascension that is guaranteed to everybody in the afterlife. An afterlife is just part of life. But these beings had control of the planet, and they had control of kind of the engineering, the metaphysical, the metaphysical engineering. They could turn switches like software and cause souls to reincarnate. So that strikes me as a good explanation, because the Urantia book doesn't cover that. But since we got the Urantia book, we've had more revelations to the Urantia people. So your friend Alec knows about that. So we can get to that too. But there was more revelation after the Urantia book that said, well, we didn't cover everything in 2,000 pages.
Yeah.
So they gave us something like 30,000 pages more.
Wow.
And I published some of that material in books. But the additional teaching states that implies that reincarnation was a evil plan to keep the assets on the planet, so to speak. So the asset is the human being developing a soul. So they wanted to keep that, recycle that forcibly back to the planet. And in between lives, they would tweak that person's soul. Now this is not proven or anything, but it just seems like the elites on the planet are tied up with this stuff. The so-called dark elites, the cabal, that are in these bloodlines that may be returning and reincarnating to be the sort of dark forces, human forces on the planet that have been running the show for a long time.
Why do you think some souls choose not to go on? They just decide to, give up and give their soul up.
Yeah, I mean, if you were Joseph Mengele at Auschwitz, torturing people and killing hundreds of people, and then you die, and you go to heaven, you have a life review. And you know how it goes, right? Life review is multi-perspectival.
Right.
So you're seeing what you did through others' eyes. So you see all the pain you created.
Right.
Right. So there are these angels that are with you. They're saying, now we're going to help you. We're going to rehabilitate you. We're going to give you psychotherapy. We're going to give you healing. And it's going to take you a little while. And you're going to have to ask forgiveness from, 6 million people, if you're Hitler. And you got to, do this. And if you want to do the program, we're going to support you all the way, 100%. You're going to have 100%. It's not going to be like being in a hospital in New York City. I mean, it's going to be 100% high quality care of your soul, as long as you need, until you become a loving person. And, you might look at this and say, I've already created enough of a mess. And then they're going to come back and say, no, we really mean it. We really want to. Mercy is God pours out mercy even to you. I mean, that's what Jesus said, right? God loves the sinners. God is coming to save them. This is what God wants to do. So you got, look, we're going to put you in a palace here and have, psychotherapy, psychedelics. I don't know. They're going to really get the soul. Your soul is going to get healing. But you have to face your life review. I mean, kind of unpleasant. They tell us in the new information from the Urantia beings that the life review is not once, but you continue doing life review for a very long time. Sort of like you sit down and watch old family movies, and in the heavenly realms, you're going to watch parts of your life with the people that were in that part of your life. So might be your kids, might be your spouse, might be your workmates. You're going to, people in your church, you're going to watch and look at the things that were perpetrated or the good things, and you're going to go over it and over it and over it to gain lessons. Because the lessons learned on earth were extremely poignant, more than lessons in heaven. Because in heaven, everything's sort of spelled out. So it's not that powerful, really. So the life review continues, but I forget your original question.
No, I think that was it. Let me ask you this. If you happen to be a person, let's say like Dr. Martin Luther King, who happens to get a soul that has, been here before, would those experiences affect you in any way negatively? Because it sounds like it kind of affects you positively, but would it affect you negatively?
So again, just a technical correction, which is it's not a soul that you're getting. The soul is sovereign territory of your own and cannot be transferable, non-transferable.
Right.
So to speak. It's like an insurance policy is non-transferable.
Right.
So it's your property, but the spirit can be transferable. So he gets an experienced God self. Now, could it be? So, that's a great question, which needs research. I personally think, and many disagree who studied this, but I think the soul, particularly since it's a soul that decided not to go on, right? I mean, not a soul, but a spirit that somebody had that they said, no, I don't want to do this. So the soul goes back to the oversoul. The spirit goes back to the kind of the bosom of God. And God says, okay, let's send it down here to Martin Luther King. So there's going to be certain defects in that soul. But technically, it's better to have experience first than not to have experience. So it's going to be a complex person. I think of Winston Churchill, for example. Very, very incredible person. But he had some big flaws. But he did great things, really great things. So I think of him as getting a complicated God self that had some missing things. And you can think of others. I mean, John F. Kennedy really made some very, very big mistakes, but he did really many great things. So that may explain that they have an experienced God self, God fragment, that had flaws.
Do you think that most of the people who are geniuses or just have natural abilities like a Beethoven, a Mozart, a Shakespeare, are probably those type of reincarnated spirit?
Some of us do think that. I don't think there's enough research, but it, when you start writing symphonies at age 5, it seems pretty likely.
Right. I got a question here. I think it's from Alec. It says, does this idea of how we humans have multiple parts to make up such as a soul, mind, personality, thought adjuster, does all this apply to ETs as well?
Yeah, according to this teaching, that's a great question. Thanks, Alec. The all beings on all planets, on all universes have all these components. Now there must be some tweaking of this, because we're told in the Urantia book that on some planets, the humans are aquatic.
Okay.
They're like dolphins, right? So I don't know, but many on some worlds have no atmosphere.
Yeah.
So they have what they call non-breather beings. They don't have lungs. They take in sunlight, sort of like photosynthesis. And so that's a pretty different kind of being. So, but from what we're told, I think it's clearly stated that every being on all planets has, there are really 5 things we're talking about. At the top of this actually is the personhood. That's the highest gift. And then right next to that is the spirit self, or the thought adjuster, or the God fragment. Then right below that is the soul. And right below that is the mind. See, how many is that? 4? And then the form, the body. So these are distinct substances. When I say substance, I mean that technically. They're technically different. The constitution of it, sort of chemically, is different. And how that is held together is like an alchemical combination, really. But I believe that the personality is the unifier of all these systems. So that we're told that every being in the universe has personhood. They have this unifying system, sort of like in software, or not software, but hardware, really. Like the system is one thing, is one. Well, software and hardware. It's a unified entity that has components that work together if the software is good. So it's like this, the thing that is the system is the personality.
Okay.
The unifier of the person.
when you mentioned a being on photosynthesis, that reminds me of this old show I used to love to watch. It was a sci-fi show called Farscape. One of the characters looked human, but she was all blue, but she was a plant.
Oh, cool.
And she would go out like near stars and get some photosynthesis going and, recharge and stuff. It was a really great character. So with all of this in thought that, on different planets, ETs, or they're going through their own kind of lifespan like we are, why are they coming here, in your opinion?
Yeah, great. God, listen, this has just been great, Jeff. Number one, you are a terrific listener.
Oh, thank you.
And, George Norrie is this, a listener like you. He really takes you in. Yeah. And a lot of people don't. They don't. They keep interrupting. So keep it up. It's great. Well, why do ETs come here in particular? Mm-hmm. So I think, I and my circle of friends that have spent their life on this, mm-hmm. We think that because of the Lucifer rebellion that I mentioned, right? So the angelic host going dark. Now, this also happened on other neighboring planets. And we're told that there are 37 planets like that are dark in this big area here, where there are 1,000 planets and 37 of them went dark. And then beyond that, there are thousands of more planets. But in the local system, what they call the local system. So I think that some of the visitors are from dark planets. So certainly like the reptilians. And the Urantia Book says that there can definitely be a reptilian type of a humanoid being, by the way. So the Draco reptilians are definitely dark. They're just dark. And so I think that they may come from one of those rebellion planets. But other visitors, let's say there are 100 different races that have been here, but most of them are benign, but some are not. But the other reason they come is we're in dire straits. And there's never, literally 1 in a million planets is like this, ready to blow itself up. So they come to, like scientists, like anthropologists, to study and to help. So if you get into the literature and you go to these conferences, you can tell this. A lot of these ETs are here, like the Pleiadians and so many other ones that are giving really important revelations. And even the breeding program, there seems to be a dark side of that and also a good side of that, to repopulate the planet with higher genetics. So that those, like the woman that had 24, what was it, hybrid?
Right.
They'll come and repopulate. And I really think that many are already on the planet, many hybrids. And to enhance the genetic pool. So that's one purpose. But another purpose is to approach governments, so we know that Eisenhower was approached by dark ETs and benign ETs. I mean, we think. I mean, the documents are there. So he went with the dark guys.
Oh, wow. It's interesting.
Michael Salla, really, I think the world's leading author on this, Michael Salla, PhD, he was at a university. He was kicked out of the university. He's written all these great books, but I think he pretty much shows that they made the wrong choice and went with the bad guys.
You've given me much more information about that than I've known. I was just very simple. I was going to say earlier that it's interesting that you mentioned Roddenberry and then you mentioned the reptilians, because he did have that one episode where they were battling the Gorn, which looked like a reptile person. I wonder if he got that from the Urantia Book.
Yeah, it says that there's a number of different types. There's also a number of different atmospheres, a number of different kinds of, if the world is really big, then the people are really short because the gravity is so, so you can't be like more than 3 feet tall. I think that's how it works.
That makes sense.
Right. So Yeah, so that have the really tall come from smaller planets. I think that's how, or it may be the other way.
Yeah.
I'm not that good with physics.
I would think maybe it'd probably be the opposite, because if you
probably
when the moon, people are jumping around like crazy. So if they were smaller, maybe they wouldn't be.
Yeah, they would fly. Fly off.
Flying
No, I
off.
think I think you're going to be bigger. So
Right.
yeah. So anyway, that's why they're very tall and very short. And some ETs are really short.
That makes sense. Let me catch another question here from Alec. Do genetics play a part into the development of the soul? That's a good question.
Alec always asks good questions. So the genetics interface with the soul may have something to do with the switching on of genes that occurs in epigenetic, theory of epigenetics, right? That consciousness, actually, I just published a book about this by this guy who's a doctor, that the consciousness changes the gene, doesn't change the gene, but it switches genes on or off.
Okay.
So if the soul is more advanced, then it switches genes on that do more for you. But if you're just like a caveman, then the genes are mainly dormant. There's higher expressions that never turn on until you get a more advanced mind and soul. So, a more advanced soul will turn on more capacities in the genome, right? In the genome. And I really believe that. I think that's true. And I think, there's a part of this, just to throw another monkey wrench into the discussion, is the Urantia Book is a genetics teaching that's, can you believe all this stuff is in one book, but it's a very elaborate genetics teaching. It states that a more advanced genome allows for more advanced expressions of the mind, soul, and spirit, and vice versa. So the mind, soul, and spirit will cause better expression of the genes. So it's an interactive mind-body connection that the epigenome, what they call the epigenome, is the connecting bridge between these things, because it's the genes interacting with the mind, with soul, really. So there's a lot of really cool esoteric things on that.
Where does intelligence play on this? Because, for example, like if you have a dog or a cat, your dog or cat will never understand you leaving the house, going to work, what you do all day, and come home. It just knows you leave and come home. And that's just, from what I understand, it's just that's the limit of their brain power. So do we have a limit, or can we become more intelligent or change that?
Remember when I said that the deity has three faces? So the Father, Son, and then the third person of deity is the source of mind. It's the source of all mind. Why is it the source of mind? Because in order to connect things, you need a mind to make the connection. There has to be a space in which the connection is made. So mind is that field or force that connects things. So the first great mind is the mind of the third person of the God, right? Because it's connecting this Father, Son. To connect these two very different beings takes mind. So the third person of the Trinity is the cosmic mind. And it's also a person, but it's the source of mind. So mind is conferred on each entity, each living being is encircuited in mind. So it's like this rope that is lowered down, and you get a little piece of the rope, but the rope goes all the way back up to the source creator, literally the source creator of mind. So you're connected to that source mind. So in theory, you can have the brilliance and genius of the creator mind, in theory, right? And so as you're ascending in the afterlife, you're moving toward that source mind. So in theory, really, you become one with it. So you have all of its intelligence. But there's other distinctions in there. So animals are encircuited into the divine mind in 5 circuits. But humans are encircuited into the divine mind in 7 circuits. So we have 7 types of fundamental intelligence, but animals have 5, actually, or less, 5 or less. So animals do not have 2 types of intelligence, fundamental types. One type is the intelligence of being able to revere something, to actually worship something, because you don't see that animals have religions. Mm-hmm. But primitive men immediately, and women immediately have a weird little religion. They're worshiping a rock or the moon, mm-hmm. because that's an intelligence that is recognizing its source. So that's a kind of intelligence. And then there's the 7th circuit, and in some systems they call it the 7 rays, right? But the 7th circuit, that meaning the lineage all the way back to the divine mind source, that itself is the intelligence of wisdom, moral intelligence. And so the kinds of intelligences that come along with religion, morality, justice, social justice, interpersonal relationships that are fair, and being able to make judgments and discriminations that are fair based on values, that's the 7th thing. And, animals don't exactly have that, but they have little kind of echoes of that, but they don't write books. They don't give sermons, right? And they don't have universities. Mm-hmm. And so that's a kind of intelligence. So there's 7 kinds of intelligence, actually. Mm-hmm. But in developmental studies, human developmental studies, they've identified many more kinds, like really 15 kinds, mm-hmm. like musical intelligence and mathematical intelligence and that sort of thing. But I think they're fundamental intelligences. Mm-hmm. And there's another way to slice that, which is that there are 3 fundamental kinds of what they call a priori assumptions. A priori meaning always existing, always already existing in the mind. And one is the three fundamental intelligences superseding everything. One is the mathematical ability to count, but in every sense of quantity. Second is the ability to make moral distinctions. And third is this worship thing that I mentioned. Mm-hmm. So if you boiled it down, you get 3 kinds of intelligence mm-hmm. that are intrinsic to mind as such, mm-hmm. which was already figured out by Immanuel Kant, the great philosopher. Mm-hmm. Basically said that.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned worship, because I sometimes tell my wife or my kids that somehow worship is programmed into humans, because it's either we're worshiping God or we're worshiping a musician or an actor or an athlete. But, people may not say they worship your religion, but they're worshiping somebody.
Totally right on. Mm-hmm. That comes from this, it's kind of obvious. And that's really what Judeo-Christianity is, because the Jews were like this basic primitive people mm-hmm. that were kind of chosen to be the place where Christ could incarnate. And you had to have some people that had some idea of God. So they had this fairly intelligent group, and they were all worshiping the wrong gods mm-hmm. the whole time. If you really read the Bible, they're always astray. They're always worshiping a rock or a gold or, and so God had to come in and, slap them around and say, no, I'm invisible. I'm invisible. I'm not an idol. I'm infinite. I'm the God of all people, not just your people. So so they were shaped to become monotheistic, which is the highest you can get, more or less.
Mm-hmm. All right, let me ask you this. I'm going to kind of change here a little bit. If someone is a beginner and wants to get into the Urantia book, do they buy the book, and would your book be like a good companion to it? Or, if not your book, is there something else that you recommend if you're a beginner with Urantia to kind of help break it down for you?
It's not, unless you're a person of leisure who has a tremendous amount of curiosity and a tremendous, kind of intellectual background, really. Mm-hmm. The Urantia book is pretty rough,
right?
Except part 4. So 4 parts. Mm-hmm. First part is super duper cosmic. It's like Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first part is actually theological and angels. Second part is more like Star Trek. Third part is the history of the planet. I mean, a real big history of the planet. Fourth part is the life of Christ. So everybody could read that. So I would read that, but I would, they can go to my website and just email me. I'm happy to do it. This is my work, my mission. Evolving-souls.org, evolving-souls.org. Just email me, and I'll send them resources to get started. My book is a little bit intermediate. It's not, unless they're really into, soul and psychology and philosophy, they'll love it. They'll love my book. But it's not really beginner book. There are other beginner things. Right. Not many. And there will be many. But I would suggest that they take the religious point of view first rather than cosmological, historical, scientific. Get into the faith. Get into grasping the beauty of the spirit that is transmitted in this text. It's so sublime. I mean, I've had so many times of ecstasy and bliss from just, oh man, now I get this. Wow. How loved I am, and so the fourth part really gets that across. Yeah. So I would start there.
Yeah, that's very sensible. I believe you've written other books as well, and also on Urantia, or are they on other things?
I have produced books on a variety of things. One, kind of the politics of the Urantia, and it's called One World Democracy. It advocates democracy for the whole world, and I wrote with another person two books that are channeled from Urantia beings. So that was actually channeled by this guy, edited by me. And there's 4 other channeled books like that. They're channeled by the Urantia beings, telling you about the Urantia book. And those are at my website too. And the best of those is something called The Center Within, which was a fabulous teaching given to a Urantia group by this celestial being. And this guy channeled it for like 2 years. And it's just perfect beginner lessons. That's the best one. It's called The Center Within, which I edited and published. But some after that. There's something called The Adventure of Being Human, this 2-volume thing I mentioned, which George Nuri loved. And that is brilliant teachings, high teachings from Urantia Christ. And I shouldn't close before I explain that in the Urantia book, it's not just a male hierarchy kind of thing, which we have in Christianity. There's female counterparts all the way up the line, right? So deity, God is not mother, has no gender. But deity is personal. But at the local universe level, deity is gendered. So Christ is actually male in heaven, in his heavenly existence, but has a female consort. So this is another great revelation, right? So there's Christ and what we call the mother, or mother spirit. These two are the creators of this local universe. So it's male, female, and they truly are male and female. Now I forgot your original question. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
That doesn't matter. Well, anyway, so this a pair, deity pair, this male female. So if you look at like Catholic images, sometimes Christ and Virgin Mary are equal. So they kind of got it, but it's not Virgin Mary. It's an actual deity, and she and Christ are one, but they're actually gendered personalities. So I don't know how we got on that. Oh yeah, so the book is channeled by both of them. So it's very sublime and not easy to channel. But this guy's been channeling them for 12 years.
Wow.
So we put out, he's got like 350 lessons. We put out 40 of the lessons. They're really great lessons. That's introductory. material also for the Urantia book, but it's almost like a self-help books.
Oh, that's amazing. I could keep this going on longer and longer, but
we'll come back another time.
As most of my listeners know, I have a time limit because these files take a long time to edit.
Yeah, right.
But I hope you do come back. Once again, what is the best way to contact you? Do you have a Facebook page too, or do you just best to contact you on your website? I'm
kind of an old guy, so I don't really do Facebook. So just go to the website, evolving-souls.org.
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 Okay, great. All right. Well, before we wrap it up, can you give us one last message here before we go? Maybe something positive here for the weekend, for the Thanksgiving weekend?
Well, we're actually told in the Teachings of Christ in the Urantia book, Thanksgiving is the best approach to God. To start out by giving thanks opens your heart. So you need to open the heart. And the mind, that's good too, but the feeling life has to be open, and you open by giving thanks for everything. Even if you're dying of cancer, give thanks. Give thanks for your life. Give thanks for everything. Even if you've got nothing, give thanks for your body, your mind. Yeah. So that I would say that I am personally incredibly grateful, for everything around me. It's miraculous. I mean, and so Thanksgiving is a symbol of that. So, just not just, give thanks for the sky and the trees and the life itself, the gift of life and the gift of a soul. So, yeah, that's in closing, to know that we're loved, and that's why we need to give thanks.
Yeah, that's a great message, because it's so funny that about a month or two ago, I heard someone else say, you need just implement this in your life every day. And I've started to do that. I've been pretty good, although it's like I've done it for so long, it's hard to keep thinking of new things to be thankful of. But just every day, write down 3 things that you're thankful for.
Yeah, it's not even verbal. It's an attitude of the heart, of gladness. It's the heart of prayer, really. Just being glad for things, just for no reason. You don't have to have a reason or a list. It's joy that's just self-existing joy, because it's really there.
Yeah.
Just open to that already existing goodness, basic goodness.
Yeah.
And be thankful for it.
Yeah, that's great. All right, Byron, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I wish you the best.
Jeff, I love working with you.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'll come back sometime.
All right, great. Thank you.
Be well.
You too.